What happened is the fishermen were actually fishermen. Some guys were fishing in the water and they didn't get any fish.
And Jesus came down to the beach.
And they saw Jesus. And Jesus said, if you come to me, you'll be a fisherman. Fisherman. He said, follow me and you will be great fishers. I would make you indeed a fisherman. Fisherman. So a fish. Fish are a fish. And I'm pretty sure they came fishers of men. Come unto me and I will make you fishers of men. When they heard that, they didn't just say maybe later. They just stopped what they were doing and they came and followed Jesus.
And they didn't hesitate at all. They climbed out of the boat and started following him.
And they just stopped their boat and they followed him. And they became the apostles. Like he wanted them to be apostles, like fish for people to gather, to come listen to Jesus, like fish for people. They helped other people. They teach them about Jesus and the gospel. They probably told people about the church and told good things about it and helped like the poor. And wanted to be missionaries and gather up people to believe in Jesus. They helped run the church. And they encouraged people to go to church. Jesus told them what to do and they do it. He wants us to follow the commandments, always pray and read our scriptures.
We can obey his commandments.
He wants us to be like him and help others and teach people about the gospel.
Kind of motivated the music selections that we've used so far. Maybe later. Have you ever thought that? Somebody asks you to do something and you say, well, maybe later. Maybe at another time. I'm not quite ready right now, but maybe later. Jesus called ordinary people to do extraordinary things. And when Jesus called, they came. What's with that? Have you ever called anybody to come to church, to be a part of the kingdom, to follow Jesus? Did they just drop their nets and walk with you? Jesus calls us to be beacons of God, and sometimes that feels frustrating to me. Does it seem frustrating to you to be the beacon, sometimes like on the opening into the sea where you're standing alone, shining your light into the darkness? So that you won't feel alone, shining your beacon of light into the darkness, I would say to you that this year would be a very good year for us to grow in a very positive way. I'm not talking about numbers. I'm not talking about filling up the seats with people. I'm saying to you that the goal this year should be different than ever before. We should grow in followers.
Amen.
Followers of Jesus Christ. There must be a reason that Jesus only called 12 to get started. And in Jesus' lifetime, he called these 12 who came with him not to immediately step into roles they did not understand. But he called the 12 to know and to grow like Jesus. 12. What exactly did Jesus require of the 12 from the very beginning? To follow. Not to just come, but to follow. to learn things, to grow. They were ordinary people with just special gifts of their own. They didn't have great talents. They weren't bankers and lawyers and Indian chiefs. They were just ordinary people, and he chose 12 of them. So a pop quiz, well, tell you what, you don't have to answer me, but the pop quiz question is, can you name the 12? Now, as a child, I would have said, I know 4. You can guess where I'm going with this. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then the teacher would grade that and say, well, you got a 50%, that's failing. Because Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were not all disciples, were they? Mark and Luke were not part of the original 12. They were writers of the gospel. Mark and Luke came into service of the kingdom later, afterwards. I didn't ask you to holler out all 12 because I have them written down. The 12, according to the book of Matthew: Peter, who became Simon; his brother Andrew, who was the first to be called; and James and John, sons of Zebedee; Philip, Bartholomew, who also went by Nathanael; Thomas, who was also known as the twin; Matthew, who was called Levi; James, the son of Alphaeus; Thaddeus, who was sometimes called Judas. Don't mistake him with Judas Iscariot; and Simon, who was known as the Zealot. 12 people Jesus called with just ordinary gifts and talents, and called in no particular order. But the amazing part, different from my experience in life, and maybe yours too, is that when Jesus spoke, they listened. When Jesus called, they came. And I don't think it mattered to Jesus at all what they did, what you do, as much as it matters what you can do for the kingdom. And the only thing that Christ asks of you is to be faithful. To be a follower, a faithful follower. It's not how much do you know or what special gifts do you have. It's how faithful you will be as you continue to follow in the footsteps of Christ and grow in that same likeness of Him. I went to the authority, of course, to research some of the things for our message this morning. Wikipedia I'm talking about. Wikipedia is always accurate and always tells us the exact truth. And so I asked Wikipedia, how many people did Jesus have to choose from who lived around the Sea of Galilee, who lived in Capernaum, which is where Jesus settled in for his ministry beginning? And guess what? There were about 1,500 people that he had to choose from. And he chose only 12. But in the time of Jesus' ministry, here's a pop quiz. How long was Jesus' ministry on earth?
3 years.
3 years. So in 3 years, that number of 12 grew to thousands. And in the time from Jesus until now, we have multi-millions who claim to be faithful followers of Jesus Christ. So I was intrigued. Aren't you intrigued? If there were 1,500 in the time of Jesus that were in the community where Jesus was living, and he chose only 12, thinking that each one of you could choose only 12 in today's society, how many do you have to choose from? So I looked it up, of course, in the population census and the demographics of our area, and I found that in the last census, Chiefland touted 2,221 people. Good grief, that's 50% more than Jesus had. And then I said, but Trenton is not the only area that we have to choose from, is it? So Chiefland is not the only, I messed that one up. Chiefland and Trenton are the areas we choose to associate with as we have planted ourselves in the middle. And I said, how many people are in Trenton? And the answer on the last census was 2014. And I read that over and over because I thought it was giving me a date instead of a count, but the count was 2014. If you add that to the number of people in Chiefland, stay with me here, there's a total of 4,235 people. Now we're talking about some big numbers, aren't we? Jesus chose 12 out of 1,500. If each of you chose even one a year, you have 4,200 people to choose from. Well, I was amazed at some of the statistics. I love statistics. I hope you do too. That if you take that 4,200 people, and there's an average of 75% of the people who live in our great United States of America, 75% would say to you, yes, I'm a Christian. And if you would take that 75% of the 4,235 people, you would find that there are 3,176, plus or minus, Christians that live in Chiefland and Trenton. And if you would do some rough calculations, that's more people than we would guess that are currently in church this morning. What does that mean? Don't you love statistics? It just means that there are a lot of people who are already Christians who don't have a church home. 2,600, silly me. Wikipedia has so much to offer. If you look at the census, if you look at the demographics for our communities, Trenton and Chiefland, instead of 75% saying that they are Christians, in our community, 62% say they're not. It's a whole different ball game now. 2,600 people are available who are not Christians, who do not go to church, and for some reason are not followers of Jesus Christ. How many of you asked to be a part of Turning Point that have responded like Simon, Peter, and Andrew, where they just dropped their nets and followed? You see, sometimes God asks us to do things that seem so easy, but turn out to be a little more taxing than that. One more thought, not that this is a major factor, but there are 311 million people in our great United States of America. And of those 311 people, 13 million of them go to bed hungry every night. And of those 13 million, that's children I'm talking about. Because there are 35 million, including the adults. Christians are about seeing to the needs of others as well as learning about Christ and trying to grow in our hearts and minds. Something's wrong with all of these numbers, I think. Because if we as Christians are called to see to the needs of others, and Christ calls every one of us to be a part of the kingdom, not to take care of the needs of the others first, but to come and follow and grow, it seems that there's something off in the calculations of what's going on and how it should be in God's eyes. And then I thought about words. I'm a lover of being a wordsmith. Is there a difference in those that come to church, those who come to follow, and those who are just fans? And there is a big difference if you look it up in the dictionary to understand the difference between a follower and a fan. Jesus called the 12 disciples not to be fans of his and his ways, but to be followers, to come to grow by learning who Jesus was and to understand as Christ being their mentor how they were to live and how they were to act. A fan is defined as enthusiastic admirers. Enthusiastic admirers. You know, when I think about that, that has nothing to do with activity. Well, I mean, you can be an enthusiastic admirer and you can applaud in the stands, but it doesn't say that you are actively working as part of a group, an association, a fellowship. If one of our goals is to become actively pursuing the needs of the world, then the numbers say there's plenty of others to follow us. But all too often, it seems to me that people are attracted to church for different reasons than I have in my heart. Sometimes they come because they're lonely and they're looking for an association of people that they can be a part of. Sometimes they're looking for the benefits of being part of a group when they have their own personal needs. And there are some who smell the baked goods as they drive by on Sunday morning and come for coffee and refreshments. You know the ones. I'm not talking about the ones coming for cookies, but you know the ones who come for reasons that don't seem to be formulating their spiritual self. It made me think of people who make outrageous claims. Have you ever heard of somebody say, well, I'm a vegetarian. I don't eat meat, only veggies. So they're big on salads and vegetables. But I ask you, have you ever run into one who didn't cheat occasionally, who didn't slip every once in a while, when they smelled the bacon cooking with the eggs? There's a name for slippers like that. Those slippers are called flexitarians. They flex with the smells that are around them. Flexitarians then would be vegetarians most of the time, but occasionally. How can you pass up bacon? I'm saying that. Of course, there are flexitarian Christians, I would guess. Those who, when it's a good time to be a Christian, they are. And when there's an appropriate time, if ever, to not be, they are. They flex in between the two borders. So in general, when we're talking about followers versus fans, we're watching what happens in God's narrative of the 12 that he chose. Called not to be fans, but called to be followers. For one reason. To learn who Jesus was, so that when Jesus was gone, they could take over. That's the difference between a fan and a follower. It's no surprise to almost all of you that I am not a sports guy. But there are people in the sports world, the sports arena, that have caught my eye over the time of my adult life. And here's one that may surprise you, Jim McKay. I watched him on TV as a commentator. But he got to that position because he started out as the football coach for USC, University of Southern California. I'm learning all kinds of sports memorabilia at this moment. Once he finished and made a name as the coach of the USC Trojans, he went into the NFL and he coached my favorite of all times, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. My daughter Michelle and I were Tampa Bay Buccaneer fans, Buck fans, when it wasn't cool to be a Buck fan. Back in the time when their jerseys were orange and white, and the big feather in their cap. Now they're red and black or something like that. You can see what's important to me. But we were fans when it wasn't cool to be a fan of the Buccaneers. McKay became noteworthy, a superb coach. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame. But here's the thing that made the difference in my life from what he said. And he said this often. It's not the superstars who win consistently. It's the average players giving their best. It's nice to have some superstars on your team, but the truth is the ones who win the game are the ones who work the hardest. So when we're asked to serve in whatever capacity, what are your thoughts? What is your response? Oh, I'm too old, been there, done that, too tired, too busy, too something, maybe later. Jesus knew it would take some time before his pupils, his students, would be ready to take on the world. 3 years to be exact. So I ask you the question, another pop quiz question. How long have you been a Christian? Christ is asking you moment by moment, do you feel ready now to take on the challenge of being a follower instead of being in the stands as a fan? You know what the difference between a flower that's alive and a flower that's dead? The flower that's alive continues to grow. There's a word that I find difficult to remember. I think it's because my brain kind of blocks out this word because I don't like this word. Not only do I not like it just the way it sounds, but for everything that it means. And that word is complacency. It's probably my least favorite word in all the world. But I heard a new catchphrase that takes over that place in my life and in my heart. Casual attitude Christians. Whoa. That is a phrase that changed my mind. And here's the story that I heard casual attitude Christians in. You see, it was the conductor of the orchestra. And he was so frustrated because every day of practice, several of his musicians would fail to show. They just wouldn't come. They didn't call ahead. They didn't have a train wreck. They just didn't come. But there was one, his first chair trumpet player, who was faithful and there early for every single rehearsal. So it was the last rehearsal before the big concert, and he decided to make an example of all of them by glorifying the one. So he gets their attention. Before we have our last rehearsal, I want to thank our first chair trumpet player. He's the only one among you who has been faithful to every rehearsal. And I want you to take note of his faithfulness. At that point, the first-year trumpet player raised his hand, and he stood up and he said, "Well, Maestro," he said, "I figured it was the least I could do because I won't be able to come to the concert tonight." You see, disciples are ordinary people who respond to being called into service to become those who not only go but grow. And here's why. Each of us in our lifetimes will find a time when we are called to step out for Jesus. We talked a little bit about that this morning in our learning hour. A time when the world is going to ask you if you are a fan or a follower or neither of those two when we're talking about Jesus Christ. And I would say to you that we have to be ready. You have to be prepared. It's our Wesleyan heritage. It's our roots to learn and to grow, to be ready when Christ called us, when the world calls us out. Part of that being ready is knowing the difference between being a giver and a tither, a fan or a follower, a cheerful part of the ministry outreach, or not. Some of us have that one line well ingrained in our thoughts. Go ahead, ask me. Maybe later. Jesus called 4 disciples first, and they dropped everything and they followed. They went with him to learn so that they could eventually take over the work of Jesus. All 12 of them followed immediately, but those first 4 are recorded of just dropping what they were doing and responding to what they were called to do. Would you leave your nets alongside of the boat and walk away? We're going into our 13th year as Turning Point. And this is the time for each of us to move beyond the starting point of who we wanted to be and who we are becoming. It's time for each of us to commit to tackling something significant for the kingdom. You know why this morning I had the children share with you the Gospel of Matthew? Jesus called the children, and here's what he said. "Let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these." No hesitation. No fan club. Just follow. Or maybe you would respond maybe later. And all the children said, Amen. Amen.